Thanks for checking out my channel, my YouTube channel, or if you're listening to this on, Amazon or Apple or Spotify in audio, getting your life back with me, Cade Cooper. As I've launched this endeavor, I started out, with just a quick explanation in episode 1 of kind of what I want to do and why I'm doing it. 2 through 4 was, a very raw and vivid story of my life, right? And after that, I talked about something that's very important to me, and it's being compassionate to people that don't believe like us, whether it's religion or otherwise. And I brought some really neat people on already, and I will continue to do that. But maybe the most exciting part to me is to be able to share with you a lot of knowledge that I've gained over, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars and meeting with tons of therapists and tons of health officials and different people. But I want to talk today about, trauma, and its effects and how we deal with it. But, one quick side note, I've started to get quite a bit of feedback on what I'm doing. And one thing people will say often is, that have seen my full story is, we can't believe how hard your life's been. We're so sorry. It's interesting to me because honestly, I don't feel like my life has been that hard. I really don't. My life is in certain ways pretty hard right now, but it's also wonderful. Doing something like this is certainly not easy. But it was interesting to me as they said that because, as I looked back at my life and as I watched my story, I would remember certain things that had happened to me. And at the time, I remembered how hard they were. But because I've processed them, they don't trigger me, right? They don't bring me back into my trauma anymore. And then that's a beautiful thing. I don't have my past affect me very much anymore. I have peace with it. I think everything I've done, what good or bad, has led me to where I am now, and I'm really happy with that. The other thing I just wanted to touch on is the idea of pain is relative. So when I was first in rehab, the first one, right, I was in the Haven in Salt Lake City, and it was a rough rehab. There were people that were in there for all kinds of offenses, and there were all kinds of different things. And as part of it, we would share our life stories. And I shared mine. And, if you want to watch it, if you haven't seen it, like I said, it's available on my channel. But afterwards, I heard girls stand up. And this is the first time I've ever heard anything like this. But I heard girls stand up talking about being molested by their therapist when they were like 3 or 4 years old. And I couldn't fathom that type of pain. It was the most heartbreaking stuff I've ever heard. After we got done, they came up to me and said, "Cade, we can't imagine what you've been through. We're so sorry." And I was dumbfounded. I'm like, you had a person, a trusted person in a position of authority, violate you in the most sacred way possible. And you think I've had a hard life? They said, well, that stuff happens, but, you lost millions of dollars in your business. And I started to understand that pain is relative. It's hard to compare. And we can, it's certainly not a bad thing when we see someone that we think at that time has it worse than us. That can give us perspective. It can get us out of being a victim. But at the same time, it's very important not to invalidate your pain. If you're thinking, oh, I don't, someone always has it worse, someone has it worse, I don't think you're ever going to be able to learn from it, process it, and get through it. For me, I believe we're here to learn and, in the end, to return and live with our Father in heaven again. So all of us are going to have to go through it. So I don't consider myself a victim. I consider myself a very fortunate, lucky man. God's been very good to me. There was a time when I was a victim. There was a time when I was caught in my pain. But the whole thing with this is to teach you how I, have got to the point I am right now. And I'm certainly not a finished product. And I don't know if this will resonate with all of you, but it's something that I want to help. As we understand, trauma is really the root problem of everything. Trauma is an event that happens in our life. The earlier it happens, the more effect it has on our body. It stops certain parts of the brain functioning. So the earlier the trauma, the more struggles you're going to have with it. So it's basically a situation that we can't emotionally deal with. So the body creates all these coping mechanisms, right? Dissociative personality disorder, which used to be called multiple personality disorder, is an extreme example of this. The trauma is so severe that the mind literally creates alternate personalities to deal with different situations. A little bit further and still severe is disassociation. People are so triggered by their trauma, they literally disassociate from their mind, and their mind does that in order for them to not have to experience so much pain. Sometimes we have horrible things happen when we're little and we can't remember them until we're way later in life. Well, I think part of that is the brain probably doing its job and, trying to save it from us until we're ready to process it. But the problem is all this stuff is stored in our subconscious anyways. Regardless if we're aware of it or not, it's certainly affecting us. And so what our brain does is it creates these coping mechanisms, these toxic coping mechanisms, in order to protect us from what it thinks are repeating patterns of the trauma, because it doesn't like pain. And so, when we have something happen to us and it feels like, hey, this is the same thing, right? Like, I was cheated on, and I'm dating this person, and this person did something that reminded me of the way that my former spouse or lover, whoever did before they cheat on me. Well, they're going to cheat on me. Well, I'm going to push them away. Well, that may not be the case at all, but if we haven't processed stuff and saw our part and their part and went through it with someone who is actually gifted and knows how to get us through it, then we're probably going to push anyone away that exhibits that. Addiction, we can take that for example. Addiction basically is a coping mechanism for the coping mechanisms that come from unresolved trauma. So, when I was struggling with addiction, I thought my problems were drugs. I thought they were pornography. I thought they were, women. I thought there was compulsive spending. If it feels good, chances are at some point I've probably been addicted to it. But I learned that my real problem was trauma, but the way to deal with it was to process the trauma and understand what my problems were. Well, my problems were these coping mechanisms, these things that my brain had done to try and protect me. But a lot of the time, I don't need the protection in reality, because what's happening in my life is not what happened. So as I start these different subjects, right, and some of them I've overcome, some of them I'm still working on, but of all the value I can give to you, other than learning my faith in God, it's learning about these things specifically, and it's probably what I'm most excited to do. Out of all of these coping mechanisms, these behavioral issues, for me, the one that's the least understood, that probably affects people the most universally and has an effect on romantic relationships, on employer-employee relationships, on children to parent relationships, on friendships, on platonic, on whatever, is codependency. I had no idea what codependency was. I think I had heard of the word, and then I thought it was just, I've got to be not dependent upon people, right? Like I've got to be self-sufficient. No, that's not what it is. In fact, I'm pretty sure every person that's created a major atrocity and shot up a score or something, there was severe isolation that marked it. With addicts, you really have to worry about us if we start isolating. That's a dangerous place. We heal together. Healthy, authentic connection is the most powerful agent of change. There's a book I read by Bruce Perry. It's called The Boy That Was Raised by a Dog. And it's one of the most touching, beautiful things I've ever read on trauma. And this man has dedicated his life to helping children process their trauma. Well, he has this story, right? And there's this young kid, and he's raised in a Russian orphanage, and he's literally raised like a dog. Well, they're not mean to him, but they don't have the resources to do anything but provide him with the necessities of life. So he's in a cage, and he's given food and water, and he sleeps, and that's about it. Well, he ends up getting adopted by a couple when he's around 7 years old. At around 12 years old, he comes to Mr. Perry's office, and he says, I see this mom, and I see this kid that looks about 12 or 13, and she's treating him like a 7-year-old. And I see the dad who's, a little, like just stop babying him. He's not 7. And he said, thank goodness that mother was intuitive enough to treat him where he was. And so as he started working with him, he realized that he was operating at about a 7th grade level at 12, right? And he realized that where the brain needed help. So what he did is he went to a 1st grade class. And with this kid's permission, he told them, I have this boy that's going to be part of your class. Now, he looks different than you. He's bigger than you. But he's been through a lot of hard things. And I would love it if you guys would help him. If you would, make him feel part of yourself and befriend him. And what happened is that those 1st graders ended up healing him. Dr. Perry says I never could have done what he did, but they did. My point is connection, dependency, being dependent on people that are dependable is very healthy. Now, codependency is something entirely different. Take me, for example. I've always been a compassionate guy. Like, when I talk about my story and when I talk about my trials, I never really was wanting to hurt people. In fact, if I ever thought I really hurt you, it always tore me apart. But, I think for the most part, I did the best I could with the knowledge I had. And, with the more knowledge, the more I realized, the more things I need to work on. And, even this past year has been an incredibly transformative year for me. And I've had to eliminate a lot of behaviors and, things I was doing to people because of my ego or different things. But I thought I was such a nice guy, right? I'm so sensitive, right? And I just care about people. And while that was true, sensitivity is a double-edged sword, because along with being sensitive to people, I was very sensitive. And I got offended incredibly easy. In fact, my brain looked for reasons to be offended, because if you've offended me, then the way my brain works as an addict is, well, then I can engage in some toxic coping mechanisms, and they're going to feel real good, and I'm not conflicted because it's your fault. You're the one who offended me. And so I would look to assign blame. Another thing is, I would do things out of obligation all the time I didn't want to do. I served a very valiant mission, but I'll tell you, there was one part during my mission that I probably could have been more valiant, and those were on service days. I would have rather been knocking doors, talking and teaching people than going and cleaning yards and helping and doing that stuff. It's not something I love. It's just not. Is it important? You bet. But as I got married and stuff, there would be nights when I'd work morning till night and be just extremely tired and have to get up early. But I would get a call from someone and they would say, hey, can you help so-and-so move tonight? And because I did not want to offend them, because I felt like, I was obligated to, and I was worried what they think, I would show up there and help. Well, I would do that to the detriment of myself. Number one, I probably wasn't very helpful there because I was talking too much and frustrated, and wanting to hurry and get home. But two, it came at a greater cost to me. By the time I got home, I was really tired. I didn't connect with my wife. I didn't sleep very well. And then I had important stuff the next day that I needed to do. And so I didn't know how to, set boundaries, when it came to tipping. Nowadays and don't get me wrong, I'm a very generous tipper. And at the end of high school, I was a waiter for a little bit, right? But like yesterday I bought some food from this place. It was just a takeout place, right? And you swipe it, right? And it says leave a tip, and it just has a suggested thing. Well, it was $30 and 15%, you know, it was like a $4 or $5 tip on top of that. My math's terrible. It was something like that, but you know, I still do tip, right? But I probably not going to tip you $5 for a $30 meal on a takeout. But I used to have to do that just out of obligation. I felt like I was a terrible person and judged. Even when I didn't have the money was the biggest part. I would give things away, not you know, not having the resources to even take care of myself. You know, I was particularly dangerous in having a good heart and, you know, trying to have all these people depend upon me, and I'll help you, and I'll help you, and I'll help you, and I'll help you. Well, the problem is I'm trying to help all you. Eventually, my life's going to fall apart because I can only help so many people at once. And really, you'll come to, you know, depend upon me, and then I'm going to let you down. But I didn't understand, you know, how to get over this. I didn't understand what it was. I thought, again, I'm just trying to be a good guy. I still believed we can make people happy. You know, that don't make you suffer. Hopefully you learn that one when you're young. I've talked about in my story having 20-year-olds that are selling pest control in the Texas heat and getting paid pure commission, and you know, none of them it seemed like none of them all had a good day the same day, right? My day was only as good as the worst sales rep because I took that as my personal responsibility. Well, sometimes these guys weren't working very hard, but I would still spend an hour and a half working with them. Well, that was the detriment to my sleep. It was hurting my relationship with my family, and it wasn't really helping them. You know, if I was to deal with that today, the first thing I'd say is, are you keeping the commitments in the contract? Are you working your hours? No? Well, come talk to me when you work your hours. Until you work your hours, I don't feel bad for you. But that's just kind of how I did stuff. A lot of things are avoiding conflict. And like I said, the title of this is You're Not Kind. You're Scared of Conflict. Well, I think there's a difference between nice and kind, and we get mixed up, right? And I talk a ton about kindness, but don't get me wrong. I will stand up for myself. I refuse to be bullied by people. I don't care. I don't have to put up for that. If someone is doing something I don't like, I'll certainly let them know. I'm better at letting them know earlier and not in such a combative way. But the avoiding conflict was not so much about upsetting other people. It was really, I just did not like the way it made me feel. You know, in the one of my favorite movies, Anger Management, which is also, you know, it's got some stuff that I don't love in it too. But Jack Nicholson is talking to Adam Sandler about his anger problem. And he says there's two types of anger, implosive and explosive. And he says, let's take a setting at a grocery store. So there's the cashier, right? And there's this guy in line, and he's just screaming at the cashier for everything that's going wrong. Well, his anger is explosive. And then there's the cashier, who every day has customers like them scream and scream and scream. Until one day, they've had enough and they go and shoot everyone in the store. That's implosive. That's that type of anger. That is not me being a kind person. It's me just, you know, even when someone needed to hear it, I wouldn't tell them, you know, because I hated the way conflict feel. Well, the thing with me is I would put up with people within my life, and they would do something, I'd be like, that's bothering me. Do it again, that's bothering me. And they're doing it on purpose. I guarantee that they're doing it on purpose. It's personal, it's bothering me. And then eventually it'd be enough and I would snap. And, you know, it did not need to be nearly that you know, rough of a situation, but that's just how I dealt with things. Well, codependency first started to really be understood back in the 1930s when they started to come up with ways to actually help alcoholics start to get sober. But there was a fascinating phenomenon they noticed with the wives of these alcoholics, right? They would start to get clean and they would come home. Well, the wives didn't like it. And they had a little idea why. You know, if you married to someone who has created all this chaos and stuff, and then they come home and they're doing so good and everyone's so happy for them, you're going to be a little frustrated, right? But it was deeper than that. They had formed an identity on cleaning up after their husband's toxic behaviors. And if I have a relationship with you and all my time is spent on fixing you and cleaning up your stuff and doing all that stuff, guess who I don't have to worry about because I don't have enough time? Myself. That's codependency. That is a numbing behavior. That is looking, in that case, to fix people, right? So in codependency, there's typically a fixer and a fixee. Or we can say an enabler and an enablee. You know, in an addiction, the addict needs to be enabled, and the codependent gets along really well with the addict because they're, you know, not dealing with all their issues because they're constantly dealing with all the addict's issues. So it creates this very unstable, very unhealthy bond that's very strong. You know, and it manifests in all sorts of different ways, and not just in relationship. You know, let's talk about romantic stuff and dating. Well, you know, eventually I'll do a pretty large series on different aspects of dating. I am single, and there's certainly a lot in it. I've been single for 5.5 years, and I've been heavily involved in singles activities, and I know people at all walks of life, and because I am the way I am, people tend to, you know, understand that I am safe, and so they share all their experiences with me. Well, I've learned a lot. Well, I was extremely codependent when it came to dating, right? I was a fixer. You know, and you know, I tended to try to fix people, to fix women, right? Well, you know, most all women that I've dated, that they've told me that they were honest with me. I'm not ready. Well, yeah, right, but I can make you ready. I can make you ready. So, you know, by the way, let's date and, you know, do all stuff that, you know, the physical different things that accompany dating, but I'm gonna get you ready at the same time. Well, that doesn't work very well, right? But it was addictive to me in a way, and I've been on the other end, you know, with people that are healthier than me, certainly fall into addictive patterns when I've been needed to be enabled as well, but it didn't end very well. You know what I mean? Like, if you get healthy, or if you're healthier, if you're dating someone who's codependent, or if you start to and is used to dating people that are less healthy than them and wanting to fix them, if you hang out with them a little while, you'll probably end up not being attracted to them. And part of that is your trauma will start to manifest, the stuff you need to work on, because you can no longer numb yourself dealing with their problems because they've processed their problems. And so it becomes not very fun. So I eventually will do an episode about all the ways specifically men manipulate women. And I understand them all. And, you know, I've listened to women long enough, and I've heard their sad stories, and I've heard all this trauma and these traumatic things, and I think it happens on both spectrums and both sides, but I'm not a woman, so I'm not going to speak for women. And I tend to be a little bit more compassionate to women because we're 3 times their size. And we are stimulated way more visually, where a woman, it's way more emotionally. And then if they're traumatized, it's not so much. But I will talk about how that works. But in relationships, codependency plays a big part. And if you start to understand how to key on codependency with people, you can manipulate people really quickly. If I really wanted to manipulate a codependent woman, it would not be hard. Hey, I'm trying to get clean. You know, it's just hard, right? Like, I feel like if someone would love me and support me, I could do it. I could, but no one, I just can't, I just don't know if I'm worthy of love. I don't know if anyone will ever believe in me. Well, someone that's very codependent will probably jump on that, and it will have very little to do with me. It may not have much to do with even a genuine desire for helping me to feel better, but there is this addictive urge to numb themselves by taking on a project that way. Well, I see people manipulate people all the time by doing that. When it comes to dating, don't sit there and say, I can see just that good, right? I can see that good. Because a lot of people do that. They just give you a little flicker of hope, right? And I'm going to pull that out. The good should be overflowing, right? You should be wondering, what's wrong? What's not, where is it? Where am I missing something? You should still be aware of those things. So that's a big part that it manifests there, and it usually begins with trauma bonding. We go out and, hey, I've had all this trauma in my life, right? And don't get me wrong, I share my trauma and I'm sharing it with the world, but I don't share my unprocessed trauma, especially with people I don't know. I share it with my therapist. I share it with my mentors. I share it with my bishop. I share it with people that are at least done as much work with me or healthier, because guess what? They have an opportunity to help me. But trauma bonding is very powerful. There's a line in, and it's very true, in Wedding Crashers. Will Ferrell is crashing funerals. And it's terrible. And he says, grief is nature's most powerful aphrodisiac. When we are sad, we are the most vulnerable to be turned on sexually, to make bad sexual decisions, because when we're hurting the most, our brain goes to what will feel the best because it will take away the pain. And for most of us, that's sexual gratification. So we meet on a date, and I've been through all this. My ex was just terrible. I know, it's just been so hard. You have? I've been through this stuff too. My ex was horrible. It's so rough. Oh, you understand me. I'm so scared with what's going on in the world and who's president or who's not in this, and it terrifies me. Yeah, it terrifies me too. Oh man, we really do have something here. I am so mad at this corporation, and I'm so mad at our country, and I'm so mad at this, and I just am so upset. Well, I'm so upset too. Well, we start to trauma bond. And if we want to put a little icing on the cake, let's throw a little alcohol on top so that our inhibitions calm down, and then boom, we connect extremely quickly. And typically it leads to these codependent relationships where someone is needing to be enabled in order to continue their behavior. The other person needs to numb what their trauma is so they continue to enable that behavior, and it is marked by dramatic shifts in intensity. When you're together and things are going good, it is one of the most intoxicating feelings in the world. But then all of a sudden things go bad and you downregulate and you feel like you're going to die. But then something good happens again and you feel good again. We see this in anxious avoidant attachment, which I'll talk about another time. I think that's the other big thing with relationships, especially with dating. But, as we learn, these shifts in emotion are addictive. They mimic drugs because they fill our brains full of dopamine, and then all of a sudden we downregulate, so we need more of that fix, and we literally become addicted to people. That's a way that codependency manifests very strongly within relationships. Again, if you date someone that is healthier than you, and you haven't worked on yourself, you naturally are probably going to lose attraction, even though they're a great, wonderful person, because your trauma will be made manifest. You can't numb yourself in their troubles. I love the idea of oxen and being equally yoked. There are two oxen. There's a yoke in the middle. The yoke is what holds the oxen together. Well, neither one of these oxen are the exact same strength. And at different times, one is probably strong and one's probably tired. But the yoke serves to stabilize the two, so when this one gets tired, this one picks up the slack. When this one gets tired, this one picks up the slack. And so they continue to move the wagon. But they're both kind of right at the same place. That's not a codependent relationship. That's a healthy relationship. I am a firm believer that, anything worthwhile in life is hard. But I think when it comes to relationships, the hard part is preparing yourself and getting yourself ready. I'll talk about the things I've done to get myself ready to find the woman that I want to find. And it's been extremely difficult. But when you find the right person, and obviously I haven't yet, but the people I have said it was just easy. We just talked. We just got along because we were on the same level. Another way that codependency will come in the form of career, right? We're stressed. We have an employer. We have clients. We're trying to take care of them. We take on too much of our load. We make too many big promises. We are scared that if we tell someone we can't do all of it, we're going to get fired. Well, maybe we will get fired, but if we're asked to do more than we can do, we probably shouldn't be in that job anyway. I own a pest control company, and I deal with all different types of people. It helps to understand psychology as well as I do too, because I understand women especially, bless your hearts, have a fear of spiders. I'm glad you do. It's made me a lot of money. In fact, if it wasn't for you husbands, I would be a millionaire and be retired, because I can't tell you how many times you've ruined my sale. But if I'm going to be honest, the people I've found that are the most scared of spiders aren't the women. They're the big tough guys. It's always funny to me. I had a situation a while back where I had sprayed a house. And this customer, and I didn't have bad feelings, but it just stressed me out, right? It was not worth the $400 or $500, whatever a year she was paying me. She never had bugs inside ever. Well, they don't make safe products that are gonna, just keep bugs out forever, yard everywhere. It's called pest control, not pest elimination. And if I can get a house, especially out in Eagle Mountain, where there's a lot of bugs, especially for Utah, to never see bugs inside, I think I'm doing a pretty good job. But every time I could come, there was just this stress and anxiety, and it wasn't personal. I knew that she was terrified of spiders. So one day I spray around the house, I leave. She has this young kid come, and I know how these kids are trained. They're trained to look around and try to find things that aren't going right. And basically they give the customers false expectations, and then the technicians absolutely hate them because they know it's unobtainable and it causes all these problems. So he'd pointed out things that he didn't think I was doing. Well, anyway, when it's hot and when it's in the summer, when I spray around a house, especially on cement, it dries freaking quick. Very quick, sometimes within a matter of seconds. So I had sprayed around this house. And I don't cut corners in my business. And you know what? I have an incredibly low attrition rate, incredibly low. I don't even get people on contracts anymore. I don't need to, because most people stay because I'm good at what I do. Well, I'm at another house and she calls and says, hey, you didn't spray the backyard. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? She's like, well, you didn't spray by the door. It's not wet. And it had been 15 minutes. I'm like, oh, it's not going to be wet. It's dry. And she's like, there's no way. It dried that quick. And she said it was 3 minutes. Well, even 3 minutes it would have dried. It was 15 minutes when she called me. I'm like, no, it's dry. It dries. And she's like, there's no way. I'm like, I didn't understand. I didn't realize you were an expert in cement. Is that what you do for a living? She's like, well, no. And I'm like, are you a pest control expert? No. I'm like, well, I am a pest control expert, and I've sprayed concrete with pesticides for 20 years, so I am an expert there too, and it dried. And she's like, there's no way. I'm like, okay, so are you calling me a liar? Are you questioning my integrity? Is that what you're doing? And she's like, well, there's just no way. I'm like, okay, you can find another bug guy. And she's like, well, no, I just want you to come spray. You're next door. I'm like, that's not the issue here. I could come spray and show you. You're questioning my integrity, and I'm not lying. So I'm not going to come back. And I'm like, by the way, how many spiders do you get inside your house? Well, I never get any inside, but I get them outside, but I keep my house inside clean. I'm like, well, spiders don't come in the house because it's dirty. Spiders come in either for weather conditions. If it's cold, they come in because it's warm. If it's warm, they come in because it's cold. They come in for other bugs, and also they come in for moisture. I'm like, you never even have bugs in your house. And so I ended that relationship with her as a client. Well, she ended up calling back, and we have a good relationship today because she ended up getting a young kid and didn't have the best experience. But that's another way that I let codependency affect me, right? I took on clients that were way too far out of the way. And then they needed reservices, and I would spend 2.5 hours going out there to take care of them because I could tell they were stressed about their bugs. Well, it costed me a lot of money and time. In reality, what I should have done and what I do now when they're far away or when I can see it's an issue is I refer them to someone that has a bigger company that's closer together. Well, that doesn't affect me, and it's better for me because I'm not stressed about it, but I make more money in that amount of time, and I focus on clients that are closer to me that I can make more money for. So I learned not to be so codependent that way. Parenthood is an interesting one. I don't like to call us as parents codependent as much as maybe that we enable, right? Because there is just an innate sense, and especially pronounced in women, to just give their life over for their offspring. Well, I feel that with my children as well. If you want to upset me, you go at my kids. That's when the rational part of Cade tends to turn off. And you know what? It's still not okay, but it's a work in progress. Well, women especially have that desire to take care of their kids. In my situation, my actions have caused my kids hurt in the past, even though I haven't meant to. I've never hit my kids in my life. I, never yell at them anymore, but I hate to see them suffer. So I spoil them sometimes. So I don't always feed them well. It's not good for them. If I spoil them forever, and don't get me wrong, they're not entitled. They understand I work hard. But if I spoil them forever, they're going to grow up expecting to be spoiled, and they're not going to value things. If I don't feed them well forever, they're going to grow up with issues. And, but for me, because I like to see them hurt, it's been very hard for me to tell them no. And I love how happy it makes them when they eat that unhealthy thing, or I give them that treat or toy. Well, I'm learning to hold them accountable because I understand that, if I don't, they're going to struggle. When I went to rehab, I expected it to be a ton of people that, were just had really rough upbringings and had nothing. Well, it wasn't. It was kind of a combination. A lot of people were people that were raised in privilege. And that's a trial. If you don't think money is a trial, you don't understand money, or you haven't had money. Christ wasn't lying when he said it's easier for a camel to go through an eye of a needle than a rich man to get into heaven. But a lot of people that are in rehab were given everything in life. And they think everything just should be given to them. And it's not that I think they're bad. I feel bad, and I work with them too. So that's how codependency can manifest in that situation. With friendships as well, right? We surround ourselves with certain people. Well, the old me, I would have had these friends, and maybe one did something that I didn't like. Well, I can put up with it. It's okay. They did it again. They did it again. They did it again. Well, eventually I just, just don't want to hang around them, but I don't want to tell them. I don't want to hurt their feelings and make them feel bad. I'm just going to quit answering their phone calls or whatever, and just hopefully they go away. Same with dating. I'm not going to tell them no, or I don't know how to say no, and I'm just going to go out with them, and I'm just going to leave subtle hints left and right, and hopefully they'll get it. Well, a lot of people just don't get it, but in the meantime, you're causing yourself all kinds of pain and struggle when you just first of all could have said no. We teach people how to treat us. At this point in my life, you know where I stand. You know where I stand. And I think that's one of the greatest gifts we can give people. If I'm dating, and the women I've dated, guess how they can tell what I'm thinking or feeling? It's crazy. I tell them. There's no guessing games. Instead of trauma bonding, I talk about, what I'm looking for. I talk about how I deal with conflict. I talk about how to understand me. I talk about, my rules or my, things that I do, right? And I'll talk about later how I do my stuff, but those are the things that I talk about. You teach people how to treat you. And so as we get into this, and in this next section, I'll talk about the opposite, which is boundaries, and how I have set boundaries and how we set boundaries. But codependency at its core can be defined as the chronic neglect of self in order to gain love, value, or acceptance from another person. Today, the people in my life, if you're in my life on a regular basis, it's because you make my life better. If having a relationship with you, and it doesn't matter in what form it is going to cause me a lot of pain and hurt, I'm probably, not going to have a relationship with you. If you're not that close and I understand certain markers, I probably won't say anything. If I can see potential for us to get along or gel, or if it's romantic, then I'm certainly going to say it right up front, right? This is kind of what I do. So the way we act, the way we do things, if we understand what this is, we will understand relationships. We'll be better at all forms of it. There's a lot of wonderful resources for codependency and understanding it. There are books that are wonderful about it. There's, two that come to my mind are Codependent No More, and there's a book called Boundaries, and it goes into way more detail with people way more qualified than me that can teach you how to deal with things. Boundaries is more Christian-based. But in the end, I think this aversion to conflict can be selfish. It, for me, was not so much I don't want to upset you as I don't like the feeling of me feeling like I upset you. But sometimes we need to upset people. Sometimes it's for the best. Some of the most rough things people said to me were the kindest to me because it created change. Some of the toughest boundaries people imposed upon me gave me an opportunity to change. My Savior, Jesus Christ, is my example in my life. And if I look at his life, and if I read the New Testament, he constantly went around causing conflict. He never backed away from it. But his motivation was always love. It was always love. And it's something that I talk about in one of my mantras, which is conflict is inevitable, contention is optional. So in this next episode, and I'll release both these together, but I understand they're, for me, I understand this is a lot of content, okay? And it's why I'm starting to do smaller snippets as well, and why I'll start to become more active in TikTok. The whole goal is to get people here because I need a certain amount of time to share what I need to share to create the change that I hope and want to be able to create. But I understand that, I'm starting to get feedback and reaction from people I care about. And one of the big things is, Kate, people feel nervous or concerned or obligated. I'm just getting around to read it. Well, I'm not offended if you don't keep watching my stuff. I'm not offended if you don't like my stuff. I'm not offended. My marketer, the person I look to is God. I'm doing his work. My prayer is, bring it to the people that are ready to hear it. And I believe so long as I keep my ambitions in check, I keep my ego in check, I turn my voice over to him, I do not forget where I came from, and I say what he wants me to say, and I harness his power by living the commandments through his Son, that this thing is just going to be what it's meant to be. But with that, I've delved into codependency. Like I said, it manifests in a myriad of ways. I'm happy to talk. If you want to leave comments on this page about it, I'm happy to. I have a certain amount of time. People have reached out to me for years through Messenger, and if I have time, I certainly can, help where I can. But, I always encourage getting a therapist, getting a good therapist who specializes in these things, working with them, understanding yourself. Because as you start to free yourself from this one, you will understand a freedom and a beauty in life. Click on the next episode where I'm going to talk about boundaries. Thanks for tuning in.